Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. So it is currently the first week of December, and I have a very small, tiny little dilemma. So at the beginning of this year, I chose 25 books that I wanted to read by the end of 2025. And while I have read some of them, there are still quite a few that I have yet to get to. So I have read 11 of the 25 books that I set out to read this year, which means that I still have 14 more of those books to check off of my list, hopefully before the end of this month. So I'm just going to pop up a couple of quick graphics so you can see the 11 books that I have already read from the list and my ratings for them, as well as the 14 books that I have yet to read that we are hopefully going to make a very good dent in, if not get to all of, in this video. So, I know that I want to read all 14 of these books that are still remaining on my list. I'm still very enthused about getting to all of them. So, I thought it would be fun to put these last 14 books into a random spinner wheel and let fate decide what book we are going to pick up first for this reading vlog. So, let's take it over to the wheel. All right, so as you can see, there are 14 options on the wheel, and I'm going to go ahead and tap to spin so we can see what we'll be reading first. All right, I am honestly so thrilled with this selection. So, we are going to start with reading Carrie by Stephen King, which is really funny because at the beginning of the year when I selected Carrie, I actually wrote Carrie slash all Stephen King, and I have made a huge dent in my Stephen King on my physical TBR. However, I have continued to add to it. So, I definitely won't be reading every single unread Stephen King book that I have on my physical TBR before the end of the month, but I will be reading Carrie for sure. So I'm going to grab that, and I'm actually going to go ahead and remove Carrie from the spinner wheel so that when I finish it, we can go ahead and pick the next book. And I've got Carrie right here. It is actually one of the smaller Stephen King books that I have on my physical TBR. So this was a really good pick for me to put on my 25 for 2025. But I am super excited to get into this. I've seen the movie Carrie, there's a couple different versions of it multiple times, but I've never read the book, obviously. So I'm really excited to experience the book through Stephen King's lens as opposed to through the lens of whichever director was leading the film that I watched. So, very excited to get into this, and I will be back with you for a halfway update if I can manage to take a break from reading to do that. And if not, I will give you my final thoughts on this when I finish. All right, I am back with an update. So I finished Carrie today, and I'm a little tired. I've been sick today, so I don't think I want to give my full thoughts right this minute. I do think it's going to be a five-star read for me, but I want to come back when I have a little more time to sit with it and really collect my thoughts. So after this clip, I will pop back in to give you my full thoughts on Carrie, but I need to pick my next book. So I wanted to go ahead and hop in so that we could spin the wheel and pick out my next book together. So let me pull the wheel up and we'll get right into it. All right, I've got my wheel all set. So let's take a look. I'm going to spin. Okay, I got By Any Other Name. And honestly, I'm really excited about this for a couple of reasons. One, it's Jodi Picoult, and actually for three reasons. She is one of my favorite authors. Two, not only is this on my 25 for 2025, but it's also on my December TBR. So I am very excited that we'll be able to kill two birds with one stone and check this off of both lists. And three, I actually have an audiobook copy of this saved on Libby. So that means that not only will we get to start by any other name, but I'm actually going to spin the wheel again to pick another book off of my 25 for 2025 so that I can read that as a physical book while I'm listening to the audiobook for By Any Other Name. And this will work perfectly for me because I listen to audiobooks when I'm doing chores, when I'm commuting to and from work, and things like that. So I really have separate time in my day to be able to do both. So I'm excited because I think this is really going to help me to maximize my amount of reading that I can get done. And it will definitely help me with checking more books off of my 25 for 2025 list. So let's go ahead. I'm going to reset the wheel and we can spin again to see what physical book I'm going to read. I've got the wheel reset. So let's take a look. I'm going to spin. Kind of hope it's a shorter book. Okay, I got a little anxious myself there because I thought it was going to end on The Great Alone, but we got Anxious People by Friedrich Bachmann. So I will be physically reading Anxious People and picking up the audiobook of By Any Other Name, and I will come back very soon to give my actual thoughts on Carrie and let you know why I did rate that 5 stars. But just wanted to hop in really quick to pick these, and I will pass it over to future me to give you my actual thoughts on Carrie. All right, I've taken some time to think, and let's go ahead and talk about Carrie. Now, I feel like there's so much that we could unpack, which I think is really interesting because this is a pretty short book. I think some people do consider this to be a novella. I really enjoyed this. I think that this provides some things that the movies just are not able to provide. And I think that the way that Stephen King frames the book is probably my favorite thing about the book. So if you haven't read this, the book is kind of interspersed with research documents, with the events as they're taking place, with pieces from one of the characters' memoirs or their reflections on what had happened at the time, and just some other pieces throughout. And I really liked that aspect. I like how the story came together. And that way, it almost really made it feel like you were watching a documentary or reading through like case notes about something that had taken place. And I really enjoyed how that made the story feel overall. Now, I do think that there are quite a few things that have a lot of symbolism throughout the book. And I am kind of tempted not to do a spoiler section because I feel like this is a really well-known story. But if there is anyone that wants to read it that isn't super familiar with the story, I will go ahead and do a spoiler section. So I'm just going to go ahead and start that now. So if you haven't already clicked away, go ahead down to the chapters, go ahead and click to the end of the spoilers so that you don't hear any of what I have to say. I'll give you 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to start to talk about the book in full detail. So if you don't care about spoilers or if you've already read this, feel free to stick around and engage in this part of the conversation. I just feel like I want to talk very specifically about the characters in this book, and I can't do that without giving spoilers about what happens to the characters and how things end up with Carrie. So I think the most obvious symbolism throughout the entire book is blood. And obviously, in this book, blood is really used to symbolize a loss of innocence. And there's really interesting depictions throughout the book of blood as it relates to the natural process of menstruation, which Carrie is obviously traumatized by because of the way that her classmates treat her at the beginning of the story. But it's also used throughout the story to talk about being unclean or sinning. And so I think there's a lot of that religious trauma that goes along with that. And of course, Carrie's mother throughout the story just reinforces that. And then you also have Carrie kind of repeating that to herself throughout the story. Now, one thing that I thought was interesting was the emphasis that was placed on Carrie's sewing and her creating her own clothes throughout the story. I think it's really obvious that Carrie is kind of getting closer and closer to a breaking point and coming more into her own and forming her own feelings and opinions about everything that's happening to her through her telekinesis and the way that she's practicing that. But I also thought that her use of sewing and creating her own clothes and then eventually creating her own prom dress really was symbolizing her being more independent because she was starting to fabricate her own image of herself, which stood out separate from the image that her mother wanted her to have of herself and kind of how she was seen by her parents, as well as the image that her classmates and the people at school had crafted of her as this outcast and this weird person, where she's creating this own image of herself. And I thought that was really cool that that was symbolized through her creating that prom dress, because prom is such a big moment for so many people when they are teenagers. And Carrie obviously was a character who probably had no intention of going or didn't ever expect to be asked to go to prom. And so I thought that was really, really cool how her creating that dress was used to show that. I also thought it was really interesting how that dress was kind of her window into society a little bit. As soon as everyone at the prom saw her dress, they were very complimentary and they were a lot more friendly to her. And so I think that kind of shows a couple things. It shows one, that as she was developing her own sense of self and being confident in that, it was more attractive to other people, but it also was showing how fickle popularity can be. Obviously, she comes to the dance with someone who is very well loved and popular amongst the other kids, so that automatically helps her status as well. But as soon as the other teenagers start to perceive her as more attractive, they are a lot friendlier to her, when their entire history with her has been that she's like a stain on society and they treat her really poorly because they dislike her. So it really goes to show, even from the beginning, just how that little bit of kindness could go a long way for someone like Carrie, who doesn't really fit in, who, through no fault of her own, is really ignorant to a lot of things, especially things as simple as the natural acts of life. And those are really things that a lot of people are ignorant about because we don't have good comprehensive sex education courses in the United States. Obviously, there are some places that do it better than others, but I work in that kind of field. And so I see a lot of the stigma, the misconceptions, the myths that people carry about things like that. And I also live in an area where the majority of people are really religious. So I also hear that side of things that is presented through Carrie's story and how her mother acts. Obviously, her mother is a very, very far extreme. You do hear a lot of the same purity culture and things like that living in the type of area that I do. So I found that really interesting to see kind of this side and how traumatizing that was from the home perspective and how Carrie's mother treated her. I do also want to talk about Sue Snell, who is one of the prominent characters throughout the story. Sue is actually one of the girls who's involved in the kind of attack on Carrie at the beginning of the book, and she's really one of the only characters who goes against just kind of going along with it or allowing things to get worse. She's the one who ends up saying, I don't want to go to prom, and encourages her boyfriend to take Carrie to prom. And when her boyfriend does that, he actually realizes, like, this girl isn't that bad. There's really nothing wrong with her. Um, but something that I found really interesting about Sue is I kept thinking about the line that Taylor Swift says in Antihero when she says, did you hear my covert narcissism? I disguised as altruism. And I just felt like that kept coming to mind as I was reading Sue's story. And she is the character who we kind of get the memoir from. So we're hearing her perspective on what happened later in life. And I just really felt like that was something that her character was grappling with. She was constantly asking herself, like, am I doing this for the right reasons? Am I actually doing this because I want this person to feel better, to have a positive experience, or am I just doing this to clear my own name? And I thought that was a piece of nuance in the book that is kind of missed in some representations of this story. And I thought that that was one of the parts that was so impactful about the book, because it also kind of reminds me of like Wicked, when Elphaba sings no good deed goes unpunished, right? And Elphaba's talking about how she had good intentions and she was well meant, but it led to bad things anyway. So did it really matter? And I think that the book kind of grapples with both of those things. If you've done something wrong and you're trying to right it, are you trying to write it because you genuinely feel remorseful and you want that person to have a positive experience and you really are apologetic? Or are you trying to change that perception because you care about how it reflects on you? And I thought that was really interesting that Sue's character kind of works through that. I don't think it's super in your face that Sue is going through that. I do think there are some definite quotes that led me to think that as I was reading through her story. But I really like that aspect of the story because, in a way, she was damned if she did and damned if she didn't, right? If she had gone along with the flow and just done her community service and gone to prom and never apologized to Carrie, maybe Carrie wouldn't have been there. Maybe she wouldn't have ended up murdering everyone because the teenagers wouldn't have played this harmful prank on her. But at the same time, maybe Carrie never would have experienced the positive things that she did experience because Sue encouraged her boyfriend to take Carrie to prom. Maybe she never would have broken out away from her mom. Maybe her mom's trauma, the way that her mom had her claws in her, would have always led her to going down this path, no matter what was the trigger for the event. And I think on that point, the end between Carrie and her mom really is meaningful because no matter what, she always hears her mom's voice in the back of her head, right? She feels beautiful in this dress, but she hears her mom saying that breasts are obscene and calling them bad names and saying that she shouldn't be on display. She always has that reminder in the back of her head. And then when she has her final confrontation with her mom sticks a knife in her shoulder. And I feel like that's where her mom's metaphorical claws being in her back turn into her actually having a stake in Carrie that we see, because she carries that with her to the end of the book where she dies. She dies with still that piece of her mother embedded into her, and her mom always was that thorn that was embedded into her. So even after her mother is dead, that presence is still there. And I thought that was really interesting. I really liked the way that that connection was made from kind of the mental aspect of hearing Carrie have those thoughts. It's written in the book that she's having those thoughts and she's hearing her mother's voice, to actually having that physical thorn in her with that knife. I really appreciated that, and I thought it was a very cool way to show that even though her mother was dead and she had rid herself of her mother, she could never escape the effects of what her mother had done to her raising her. And then the other character that I wanted to discuss in the book was Chris Hargison, I think is her last name. I'm thinking of the very popular girl who goes the exact opposite route of Sue Snell, and her boyfriend, who is also a very lame person and definitely is, I would say he's the most outright evil person in the story, although Carrie's mother, I would say, is pretty evil because she has all this religious trauma and she believes these things and she's passed all that on to her child, which has really negatively affected her. But I would say that Chris's boyfriend is a really obvious example of someone who is just inherently bad. He's so willing to go out and murder the pigs that they end up using for blood. The other boys that are with him are like, I think we have enough blood after they kill the first one. And he's like, no, kill it. So he obviously is kind of bloodthirsty. He also talks about wanting to beat Chris pretty frequently, and he is pretty ugly to her throughout. So I think it's really obvious that he is just not a good person in general. And I think another thing that's really interesting when you look at his character in comparison to the other characters, especially in comparison to Chris, when he sets the trap for the throne for the prom king and queen, he repeatedly says that he doesn't even care if it's Carrie who's in the seat. He just wants to do this harmful thing to anyone who's in that seat. So it's almost like, in a way, he has potentially been outcast in the same way that Carrie has. And maybe that's twisted his mind to now be this person who is so hateful and so vengeful and just wants to hurt whoever they can. That might not be the case. He may just be evil for the sake of being evil. But I thought that was really interesting that for Chris, it was very targeted. She wanted to continue to target Carrie because she felt like Carrie was just wrong. Carrie was this stain on her life. and she was angry that the attack that she kind of led on Carrie at the beginning led to her not being allowed to go to prom and led to all these other issues, and she really wanted to heighten that. But her boyfriend, who is helping her with this, really just wants to do it because he's not a good person. And even so, even though he started going along with it because of her, repeatedly, he's like, I'll be done with her after this. Like, she's not important. I think he even fantasizes about going as far as killing her. I know he talks repeatedly about hurting her, and he does hurt her in the book, but I don't recall if he went so far as fantasizing about killing her. But I feel like he definitely had a couple of quotes in there that at least insinuated that, which I thought was really interesting because you have this character who does become murderous, and in a way, you're almost rooting for the character who's become murderous because of how poorly she's been treated by everyone. And you feel like, even though at least one person has switched up, and by default, that person's boyfriend has also changed the way they're acting and treating her, is it really because they care about her, or is it just because they care about themselves? You always have that kind of in your mind. And if it's just because they care about themselves and their image, are they just as at fault as the other characters that were terrible to Carrie? I think there's a lot to really ponder from that, which I really appreciated about this book. I think it gives you a lot to chew on in terms of the characters and how they interact with each other and why people might be motivated to do different things. But in particular, with Chris and her boyfriend, I thought their relationship was really interesting. And I felt like there was something that I couldn't quite put my finger on, or I'm not sure if I'll be able to perfectly articulate. But I felt like there was an interesting choice to have Chris, who's supposed to be this like most popular girl in school, that is like too cool for school, right? Everybody thinks she's like the coolest chick there is. And she has this kind of loser boyfriend who's a jerk. He's the stereotypical older guy dating a teenage girl, and he just is really not a great person. He hangs out with a bad crowd, he gets involved in bad stuff, and they've been hanging out above this bar, having sex. Like, there's all these things that the two of them have been doing that are less than positive and don't seem to be healthy for the two of them. We do also have that juxtaposition of Chris and her boyfriend's relationship and their sexual intimacy versus Carrie and her feelings about sexual intimacy, and then Sue and Tommy and their sexual intimacy. And I thought that those different comparisons were really interesting to include in the book, especially with Carrie's perspective about intimacy based on what her mother has taught her. But that being said, I thought it was really interesting that Chris, as kind of the perfect girl, maybe it was supposed to be that she was getting this like bad streak out of her system. I'm not sure, but I felt like there was something to be said, or there was something that King was trying to say about this quote unquote kind of perfect girl seeking out an abusive relationship and being with a guy that she knew was not good for her and knew would treat her poorly. I felt like there was a lot that Chris said that made it clear that she knew exactly the type of relationship she was getting into, and she didn't plan to stay with that boyfriend, but she knew that he would treat her poorly. And I wondered what King was trying to say about the mindset of this type of teenager and this type of individual who is so hurtful to others, and then also seeks out a relationship in which it's the most intimate relationship she could have, and she wants that person to also treat her poorly, or she's seeking that same type of treatment. I almost wondered if he was trying to not give her a repentance, but maybe show that she's a terrible person. And so she was seeking out the treatment that she kind of gave to others through that relationship. I'm not sure 100% what he was trying to say, and I don't feel like I can perfectly articulate my feelings about what that was meant to say in the book. But I did think it was really interesting that this character, who's supposed to be kind of the cool girl, the mean girl in school, but everybody wants to be like her, that she would be with someone knowing that they would be extremely abusive to her and treat her poorly. And I felt like it was trying to say something with regard to how she treats other people versus the relationship that she chose to be in. So I think that's all of my thoughts. I think obviously I could talk about Carrie Carrie's rampage at the end of the book. I already mentioned that I think you're supposed to feel very conflicted about rooting for her as she does all these atrocious things, but Carrie is that underdog character that has just been beaten down her entire life. And I think anyone that reads this book, no matter what Carrie's actions are, it's going to be hard not to root for her because you do feel bad for that character who is being treated in that way. And I think the book also kind of asks, how far is too far? But I think it asks that from multiple perspectives also, not just from the perspective of Carrie murdering the people of the town, and not just murdering the people of the town, but also setting off several resulting explosions. So it's not just the teenagers at her high school that are killed, it's a lot of people throughout the entire area because she was blowing up gas stations and things like that. Um, but also asking how far is too far with the actions of the other characters around her, and really reminding you that the things you say and do impact people. You're not the only person who's autonomous and has feelings, and you could have really dire consequences if you choose to do things that are harmful to others. So overall, I really enjoyed this book, and I think I can go ahead and stop spoilers here. So we are all done with spoilers. And yeah, overall, I think this is a really short read. It's only 300 pages. And this was Stephen King's first published work, if I am accurate in that knowledge. And I think it's a really strong first work. And I think it's really cool, having read a lot of his other stuff, to see kind of where he started and have an appreciation for his writing and how he set this book up versus how he's set up some other books now that I've read. But overall, I really enjoyed this, and I think it really deserved the 5-star rating that I gave it. So if you haven't picked up Stephen King, I do think this is kind of a gory place to start, but if you're interested, I do think this book is really good and a really quick read, so I would definitely recommend it. All right, when I last left you, friends, we were talking about my thoughts on Carrie by Stephen King. But since then, I have finished the next 2 books, so it is time to talk about Anxious People and By Any Other Name. And I really enjoyed both of these books. So let's go ahead and start with By Any Other Name. So first and foremost, this audiobook was just an experience in seeing how stupid I could make myself feel. So first and foremost, I mentioned that this is one of my favorite authors. As soon as I started the audiobook, she said, "This is By Any Other Name by Jodi Picoult." And I've been saying Picoult, so I don't know if I've just been pronouncing it wrong forever, or if I heard it that way somewhere. But Jodi, you're never going to watch this, but I apologize. So Jodi Picoult, I'm going to pronounce her last name correctly moving forward. That was number 1. Number 2, I went in completely, and I mean completely, blind to this book. I don't know why I had this misconception, but for some reason I thought this book was about a transgender character. And I think it's possible that maybe Jodi Picoult has another book that deals with a transgender character. I don't know. I swear I watched someone read one of her books for a reading vlog and say that it dealt with a transgender character and their experience, but that was most definitely not this book. So this book followed 2 separate timelines. It followed a woman in modern day whose dream is to be a playwright, and one of her ancestors in the past in England. And so I was first really shocked when we started getting into the story, and I realized that this was actually more of a feminist story about the difficulties that women have had in the writing sphere, especially trying to get published back in the day, whether that be for poetry or stage plays or novels. And then today, some of the struggles that women still face in the world of producing plays or producing scripts to be performed. So this book was really, really interesting. And it actually started off with our character Mel that we're following, I believe, when she's in college. And she's written a play that's really deep and meaningful to her because that's what her advisor asked her to do, and she's really touched on personal subjects. And when the play is staged, there's a part at the end that insinuates something, and her play just gets completely ripped a new one. One, it ruins her relationship with her professor, and two, there is a critic in the audience who says a lot of really hurtful things about her play. So she kind of goes into the shadows. She is working as a nanny, and the next time we catch up with her, it is several years later. She's still writing, but she's no longer putting herself out there. So she has been working on a play called By Any Other Name. And the subject of that play is her ancestor, Amelia Pisano, who was the first woman to be published in England. So she published a book of poems. But along with that, there has been speculation, and maybe this is speculation that you're actually familiar with, that Shakespeare was not the main playwright or the only playwright that contributed to all of the plays that have his name on it. And this is kind of a hot take, right? Because I'm sure Shakespeare is more than just a household name. We're all familiar with Shakespeare. A lot of us had to read Shakespeare in school, study his plays, and there's just a lot of evidence that shows that he potentially was not the person who was writing those plays. One thing that I thought was really interesting, I don't really think this is a spoiler because this was actually based on research that Jodi Picoult did to write this book, was that despite the fact that a lot of Shakespeare's plays have very educated, knowledgeable, and strong women in them, he actually never had his two daughters educated. And I think that really is one of the biggest red flags to me, that he wouldn't be promoting a certain image or message in his plays, but not living that in his own life as well. There's a lot more to do with that that's presented in the book. So I definitely recommend reading this, but I found this to be so interesting, and I love seeing how these two women's lives mirrored each other. And there is a small romance in here. There's also a lot to do with friendship and navigating friendships, especially when it comes to one being someone who in the field that you're in are in a marginalized community where it's a struggle to have your voice heard, but how it's important that you don't overlook the communities and the struggles of the others around you that you care about. And there's a scenario in the book where our main character puts another character who also belongs to some of those communities in a position to speak up for her and be that person who is kind of taking the heat and taking the limelight for her. And it's just so unfair to that character because they're finally getting recognition, but it's not for their own work, and they are someone who also feels that they have struggled to be recognized in their work due to their identity. So I thought the way that this book dealt with identity and those topics, especially in navigating a friendship where our two characters are in the same field, was really interesting. There's also neurodivergent representation in this book, which I thought was done really well. And then I really was in love with all of the chapters that had to do with Amelia Pisano and her life. And Amelia Pisano was a real person that was researched for this book. Now, some of the things that are in the book were fabricated. It's not 100% her true story, and that's just because there's no 100% documentation of everything that she experienced. So based on some context clues, they did have to fill in the blanks a little bit on some of her life experiences, but the basic through thread is fairly accurate based on what was presented in the research findings at the author's note at the end of the book. So I would say if you haven't read this or haven't read Jodi Picoult, I think this is a really great place to get introduced to her. I've read some of her other works that are a bit longer, like My Sister's Keeper or Handle with Care, and I think that this one is a easy enough read, still deals with some difficult topics, but presents a really interesting story. And so I would recommend that this would be a great place to jump in if you haven't read any of her books. I've really enjoyed everything I've ever read by her, but I would definitely recommend this one. And it really caught me off guard, and I ended up really, really enjoying it. I'm glad that I went in blind, but I just thought it was so funny that I literally had no idea what this book was about, and I was so off base in what I thought it was going to be about. And I did rate this 4.5 stars. So not quite a 5 star. It was like missing that little extra something for me, but I did rate it 4.5 stars. So absolutely love this book. Very happy to have it in my Jodi Picoult collection. And I also finished Anxious People by Friedrich Bachmann, and I can finally say that I've read a Friedrich Bachmann book. I have had so much FOMO because so many people have read his books and absolutely loved them, and I was so tired of missing out. So I'm so glad that I finally read this, and I really enjoyed this. It was a little slow to start for me, and I wasn't sure if his books are typically translated. Yeah, so this was translated by Neil Smith, and sometimes with translated works, I feel like when they're translated, depending on the translator, sometimes they can lose a little bit of the writing quality just in a desire to stay true to the source material. So I don't know if Friedrich Bachmann's writing is really kind of as staccato as this read to me and really kind of a very straightforward writing style, or if that was more how the translator interpreted it. But this is a very different writing style from a lot of the other books that I typically read. So it did take me a little bit of time to get into this, but once I was into it, I did really enjoy the story. I liked how everything came together, and I did think this book did a beautiful job of pairing very serious topics with humor throughout. So it was not only a fun book, but it was also a very heartfelt book, and there were definitely moments in this book that made me tear up. This book deals with a lot of mental health challenges and shows how they can present themselves in many different people, and shows a lot about how we can internalize things and blame ourselves for them and how that can affect us down the road. So I just thought this was a really beautiful book. If you are struggling with anything mentally, please reach out to 988. This book does deal with a lot of suicidal ideation, and so I just wanted to mention the National Crisis Hotline for that. This book does also have resources at the end of the book. So right after the last chapter, it has some numbers in here and some places to reach out to, but I don't know if these are specific to a certain country or if they are universal hotlines. So 988 is the national crisis line. So just like we have 911, if it's a mental health crisis, you can call 988. But that being said, I did really appreciate the way that this book handled suicidal ideation and talked about depression and anxiety. I thought that this book did such a beautiful job showing several different relationships and really breaking those down and showing not only how we perceive one another, but also how we're perceived from the outside. And there was just so much throughout the book that really was a reminder that sometimes we just overthink things or put too much pressure on ourselves. And there is one character in here that really touched my heart, and I might need to do a spoiler section because I don't want to spoil this for anyone if you're going to read it, but it was a very tender moment. So I will do a very, very brief spoiler section just so I can talk specifically about this character. So I'm gonna do spoilers. You can click down below to skip them. Go ahead and do that. I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. Okay, hopefully if you don't want to be spoiled, you're gone. But the character that I'm referring to in the book that I found really touching was Estelle, who is an older woman, and she is just one of the people that's in the apartment that the viewing is taking place in when our bank robber enters the apartment and then realizes they've accidentally started a hostage situation. So Estelle's character really touched me because she is an elderly woman, and the whole time she's saying that she's just waiting for her husband, Nut, to go and park the car. and it comes out that she's not actually waiting for her husband to park the car. He actually has passed away, but she just finds it easier to say that she's waiting for him to park the car. It makes her feel closer to him and like he's still alive sometimes. And I just thought that that was such a beautiful sentiment. And when that came out to the other characters, I think it was a really big reminder for them to appreciate the moments that they have with their partners and their loved ones. And so I really appreciated Estelle's story, but also how it affected the other characters when she shared that, because there was a lot of kind of petty stuff going on with some of our other characters that were in relationships. And I think you really can lose sight of the forest for the trees when you're disagreeing with your significant other or your friend or your family member. And it's really nice to have that reminder sometimes that this is finite, it's not infinite. And so you definitely want to appreciate people while you have them. So I just really thought that that was beautiful. And then the way that she really brings all the characters together at the end of the book, kind of in our afterward portion of the book, the fact that she houses the bank robber and she chooses not to sell the apartment because it is her apartment, and the young couple that are pregnant move in across the hall from her. So they really, through this kind of happenstance thing that could have been really ugly, found so much positivity and really formed a new family together. And I just thought that was really beautiful. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. The writing style didn't resonate with me all that much, but the message really resonated with me. So for that reason, I did rate this 4.25 stars, just because the writing style did detract from my reading experience a little bit. I felt like I couldn't get into a good rhythm with reading this one. I just couldn't stay hooked into it because the pacing of the writing wasn't really matching the story and the plot and the characters for me so much. But I definitely do want to read more Frederick Bachman, so I will absolutely be doing that. But very happy to have finally read Anxious People. And now that we've reviewed those two, we can go ahead and spin for my next book. But before we do that, I did want to give you guys a little update. So as you know, I had By Any Other Name as an audiobook through the Libby app, and I do have a couple other audiobooks on my 25 for 2025 through the Libby app. So I did go ahead and remove those books that I am planning to read as audiobooks from the wheel. And the only reason I did that is because, one, I need to prioritize listening to those audiobooks in the order that my loans are going to expire on Libby. So if I have one that's going to expire in 5 days, but I still have 21 days on another one, I obviously want to go with the one that's going to expire soon first. But also, I didn't want to spin the wheel hoping that I would land on one audiobook and one physical book like I did this time. I think I just got really lucky with these two picks. So I did just go ahead and remove the audiobooks from the wheel. So the wheel is only going to have the books that I'm planning to physically read on it moving forward, and I will just let you know which audiobook I'm going to be picking up next. So the next audiobook that I'm going to get into is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, and I do have the book here. So I do have a physical copy, but I was able to get an audiobook of this one, so I figured I might as well listen to it because that's going to make me more likely to be able to finish all of my remaining books on this list of 25. So I've got that one that I am planning to read next, and then we will go ahead and spin the wheel for my next physical read that I'm going to get into. All right, I've got my wheel ready to go. So you'll notice that it's got a few less options on it just because, like I mentioned, I took all the audiobooks off. So I'm going to go ahead and spin the wheel and let's see what we get. Okay, we got The Bone Season, and I'm a little nervous because this does mean we are going to start a new series, but I am very excited to read some Samantha Shannon. And I do have a physical copy of this book. I do also have the entire series, the re-released versions, on my Kindle. So I probably will prioritize reading it on my Kindle just because that's more portable for me and a lot easier for me. But I am really excited to get into this. It's been a really long time since I've read some Samantha Shannon, and my husband is actually reading Priory of the Orange Tree and A Day of Fallen Night right now. And so I am definitely having a lot of FOMO about that because I've been really missing reading her work. So very excited to get into this. I don't know too much about this. I believe our protagonist has some type of magical powers. I think her name is Paige. I do know that. I've seen some excerpts from the books, especially leading up to the most recent one coming out. But other than that, I really don't know what to expect. I just know that I think she has some magical powers and that's it. So, as per usual, I'm going in pretty blind, but I will come back and give you an update either on this or on the Heaven and Earth grocery store as soon as I have some thoughts to share with you. Hey friends, I'm back and I have updates. So, I did finish the Heaven and Earth grocery store. So, I wanted to go ahead and give you my review of this and then chat about a couple things with regard to the remainder of the vlog. So, first, let's go ahead and talk about the Heaven and Earth grocery store. So, as I mentioned in my previous clip, I did pick this up as an audiobook, and I'm not sure if it was to its detriment because there were a couple things just initially when I started the book that weren't exactly perfect. So, when the book started off, the book starts with Pottstown, Pennsylvania, which is the main setting of the entire book. And first, I will say that I was pretty interested that it was set in Pottstown because I have actually been there a couple times in the past just with my grandparents. Actually, it's a pretty common stop for the BMX circuit, which I know is so random, but my grandfather has been racing BMX for a long time, and so I've been to Pottstown with them for some BMX races, but I wasn't aware of any of the history of the area, and so I thought it was really interesting to get to learn some of that from this book. And this book especially centralizes on the experience of Black and Jewish Americans that lived in Pottstown. But when the book kicks off, it is in, I think, the 1970s. There has been a pretty major storm that's come through, and some remains have been uncovered due to that. And so the book kind of kicks off with the police coming to a person's house and asking if they know anything about it. And there's one key point that's made when the skeleton is found that it is holding a necklace. And so that's kind of the mystery that the book kicks off with. But I will tell you that as the book went on, I quickly forgot that this was kind of the jumping point and the inciting moment for the story that we're being told as it unfolded throughout the rest of the book. So I kind of had a little bit of a hard time getting into the book just because initially I was very confused because we start with this introduction. You feel like there's going to be kind of a murder mystery, and then we jump back, of course, to start from the beginning of the story. But at the beginning of the story, there are tons of characters being introduced, and the book kind of jumps back and forth through a lot of that part. So initially, I wasn't quite sold on it. I was having a little bit of a harder time getting into it and figuring out where the story was going to go and how these things were going to be connected. But as the story went on, the connections started to make more sense to me, and I did just start to enjoy experiencing the characters' lives and what they were going through alongside them. And I did think that the book was very impactful in the way that it did show the experience of the Black and Jewish Americans that were centered in the book. I will say for me personally, the most impactful part of the book was the way that the book shared the experience of physically and neurologically disabled individuals. And this was primarily done through the characters of Dodo and Monkey Boy. And those aren't their real names, but those are the nicknames that they had in the book. And that part of the story by far definitely hit me the hardest. I was really heartbroken as I was reading their story, and I was the most engaged with the book as we were being given that part of the story. So that definitely increased my interest in the book and definitely raised the rating of the book for me because that was the part of the book that I felt had the most clear storyline and had the most to say. It really made the most impactful statement for me personally. And then towards the end of the book, of course, we come back to the incident that kind of kick-started the book, or what led to the skeletal remains that ended up being uncovered at the start of the book. And when I tell you, when I got to that part, I literally had like an "oh" moment because I had completely forgotten that that was where the book started off. I was satisfied with the ending of the book. I thought it drew everything back together really nicely, but just because of all the jumping around that kind of happens at the beginning of the book, I completely forgot that that was where the book started. So I did end up rating this book 4 stars overall. I do think the book was really good. I did end up enjoying the writing, and I did think that it really did have some really meaningful parts, but I don't know why the beginning of this just really didn't catch for me, and I did have a little bit of a harder time getting into it. So I do think this is a good book. I would still recommend it. I would also be interested to know if my reading experience would have been less confusing or better if I had physically read it as opposed to listening to the audiobook. But ultimately, I only had time for the audiobook this read through, so maybe this will be something that I revisit in the future because I would be interested to see if that would make a difference in my reading experience. But 4 stars is not a bad rating, and I did still appreciate this overall, so I would still recommend it. And in other news, I have started reading The Bone Season. I have primarily been reading this on my Kindle because I do have the author's updated version on my Kindle as an ebook as well, but I am reading it pretty slowly. I have definitely noticed that I am slowing down with physical reading just because I have so much to tackle because we are literally about to leave to go out of town for Christmas. And so I have been having to get everything together here with presents and prep the house. I personally like to come home to a house that's perfectly clean and take care of all my chores before we leave. So I've really been prioritizing those types of things, which means I've had lots of time for audiobook listening, but not a whole lot of time for sitting down and reading. And I've just in general been kind of exhausted. So I normally do a lot of my physical reading at night before bed, and that just hasn't been working out for me. So I will say it's starting a little slow. There are a lot of terms that are being used that I'm sure as the book goes on more, I will start to understand the vocabulary of this world better. But I have just noticed there's been a few where I don't feel like we're given a ton of context to be able to understand what they mean. But I'm not too worried about how that will impact my overall reading experience. I would just forewarn you that if you're picking this up, there is a glossary at the end of the book, but you might just run into some things that don't have tons of context at the beginning of the book. So I'm curious to see how that continues to go as I continue to read. I'm hoping that I will find that as I read more and I become more familiarized with the world, that those things will just seem second nature and they'll make sense in the context of the book. But that just kind of surprised me right off the bat. I will say that I'm really liking what I'm reading so far in terms of our main character, Paige, and where the plot seems to be going, but I haven't read very much, so I will have to update you later on. But with that, since we are about to go out of town for Christmas, I am a little concerned whether I will get to any of the other books on the list that I was hoping to physically read. So I definitely have a short list of audiobooks, and I have some Libby holds that I definitely think I'll be able to get to, especially with traveling, but I'm just a little concerned about having time to physically read everything. So we will just have to play it by ear and see how that goes. So let me at least give you a little update about the audiobooks that I have lined up, and then we will talk about plans. So I do have some Libby holds for a few books, and the first one that I'm pretty sure I'm going to be picking up next is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenson, or Morgenstern, excuse me. I haven't previously read anything by this author, but this is the author of The Night Circus, which I know was extremely popular, and I actually saw this book on another booktuber's recommendation, so I'm really excited to get into this. I generally trust her recommendations and have a similar taste to hers, so I think I'm really gonna like this. But I do currently have a Libby hold for this, so I'm pretty sure this is gonna be the next one that I pick up, and then after that, I have already saved Normal People on Spotify because I have a premium membership. And so This is a pretty short audiobook, which makes sense because it's a pretty short book, but I've got that saved. I kind of want to physically read this one, but I just think based on time, I'm probably going to have to go with the audiobook if I'm wanting to read it soon. So we will see. I do think I have enough listening hours on Spotify that I should be able to read all of this over the break. My Spotify hours, I think, typically roll over the 21st or the 22nd. So even if I were to start this next, if it did pause me, I think I've got a couple hours left, then I would be able to resume it pretty shortly. But definitely really excited to get to this one because I did love Intermezzo, and I would say that Intermezzo was like a 6 star out of 5 stars for me. So I'm hoping this will be a repeat of that, but I do have a plan for the audiobook for this one. And then I've got a hold for Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries as an audiobook. I do also have this physical copy, but also an ebook for this one. So if I do finish the Bone season and my hold is not available yet for this audiobook, I might go ahead and read it as an ebook. But I really do want to get to this one. I'm feeling a little more inspired to read it. I kind of have put this one on the back burner, but I don't know. Out of everything that I've been reading, I'm kind of getting into more of a fantasy mood. So I'm really hoping that this hold comes up. But of course, I will update you whether it does or does not. And then the last book that I'm considering getting to as an audiobook on my list is The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. Now, I have used both audiobooks and physical books to read Kristen Hanna's books in the past, and both have been great reading experiences for me. So I'm not concerned at all that the audiobook would detract from this reading experience. And in both cases, whether audiobook or physical book, I have rated her books 5 stars in the past. So I definitely would say this is a 5 star prediction for me. But considering that it's the holidays and it's kind of a joyful season, I feel like this is going to be a bit of a darker book, especially based on the synopsis that I'm kind of aware of in terms of this revolving around a father who was a Vietnam War veteran. And this is after he's come home and has some trauma related to that and potentially takes that out on his family. So I think this might be a bit of a harder read. And so it may make it a little easier for me to digest if I do choose to listen to this as an audiobook as opposed to physically reading it. But we will have to see. I think this will probably be the last of the audiobooks that I get to because I'm not quite ready to get into this sad headspace. There were quite a few difficult topics in the Heaven and Earth grocery store. And so I'm definitely looking forward to giving myself a little bit of a break from that. I'm hoping the Starless Sea is going to be a little more whimsical and fantastical, but we'll have to see. And then I'm also hoping that Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies will kind of be a mood booster. So I'm trying to kind of go back and forth a little bit with these so that I don't get totally bummed out over the holiday season. But I do think I will be listening to this as an audiobook as well, which after the Bone season will leave us with 5 remaining books on the 25 for 2025 TBR. So I am hoping that I will finish the Bone season by the time that we're coming home from our little Christmas trip. That way, I would still have the time between when we get home and New Year's Eve to try to at least get one or two other books done that are on the list. But honestly, at this point, I just want to enjoy these books and read in the way that is going to be best accessible to me. So I'm not 100% sure if I will get to those, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I'm still optimistic right now. So we will see. But I will say I'm definitely not going to prioritize reading while I'm on my Christmas trip, of course, because we live pretty far from family. So I definitely want to dedicate as much of the time that we're there as possible to being with them and being engaged in the moment. But I am definitely going to try my best because I really do want to accomplish reading all 25 of these books. So we will have to see. But for now, I'm going to continue with reading the Bone season. And I do think I'm going to fully commit to starting The Starless Sea as my next audiobook since I do have that Libby hold available. So I will probably start reading that today. So the only other thing is that I'm not sure if I'm gonna have time to record or not while we're visiting family. So if I do have time to record, obviously I will hop in and update you as I finish books. And I anticipate that I probably will be finishing a couple audiobooks at least while we're there. So I'll hop in and talk to you about those if I'm able to. And then if I have any continued thoughts about the bone season as I read it, I will do that as well. But if I'm not able to make time to record while I'm there, then when I get back, I will hop on and give you an update about any books that I've finished while I'm there, and then any books that I'm going to be continuing once we get back from our Christmas trip. So hopefully, I will be able to update you individually, but if not, we'll just do kind of a short wrap up for the week of Christmas, and then we will continue from there. But I will see ya when I see ya. All right, friends, we are back at my house and it is after Christmas. So that does unfortunately mean that I wasn't able to record anything while we were traveling, but I have finished 3 books. So I wanted to go ahead and update you on those and update you on my plans because we've still got just a few days left in the month for me to try to get everything done on my list. So the first book that I finished while we were on the trip was The Starless Sea. And don't worry, because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to sit down and record immediately. I did make some notes as I was reading, which honestly was really nice. I honestly think I will probably do that in the future. It's been really nice just to collect my thoughts a little bit more for vlogs, which I feel like is a given. I probably should have been doing that anyways, but regardless, I really, really enjoyed The Starless Sea. The writing in this was a lot more lyrical, so this was a nice change of pace from the last couple of books that I've read, and it definitely read more like a traditional fairy tale, even though I would say it is definitely a modern fairy tale. And I really appreciated the way that we had parallels between a character who was trying to figure out who they were and find themselves and be confident in that, alongside stories that were trying to find their appropriate ending. And I don't know, something about that was just really beautiful to me. I don't know if I can perfectly articulate that parallel, but I definitely saw it and felt it as I was reading. I also really loved all of the characters that were in this book. I feel like the author did such a good job crafting characters that were all really endearing. They all had unique qualities that made them stand out. So it wasn't confusing that there were quite a few characters and that we were following several different stories that eventually came together. And so I really appreciated that about this one. Honestly, I don't feel like I have tons and tons to say other than I really enjoyed this and it was a really nice change of pace for me. And I did end up rating it 5 stars. As I was reading this, I kept thinking about how I wanted to articulate why I gave this book 5 stars. And I just kept thinking about Emmy Rossum saying 5 stars is a feeling. And honestly, that's how I felt with this book. I think if you read this, you'll definitely see why I enjoyed it and you will appreciate the writing style and the characters and the storyline. But sometimes it is just that overwhelming feeling that a book is going to stick with you. And I feel like I've genuinely continued to think about this every day since I finished it. So definitely 5 stars from me. And I honestly am already ready to reread the physical copy since I listened to the audiobook because I really want to go through and annotate it. So maybe I'll do some rereading in the new year, but that was the first book I got to. And then after The Starless Sea, I picked up Normal People. Like I mentioned, I did have this on Spotify, and the audiobook is, I think it's not even 8 hours. So this was really a good next pick for me. I was excited to read this, and honestly, I'm a little disappointed because I did really, really love Intermezzo, and I just don't think this impacted me personally the same way that Intermezzo did. It didn't quite hit the exact same for me, but I did still think it was a really, really great book. I still really enjoyed Sally Rooney's writing. So, some of the things for me with this, first and foremost, which I feel like this is echoed in a lot of individuals' reviews of this book, but the characters in this are pretty annoying, and I personally hate miscommunication tropes. And this is literary fiction, so it's not like it's your standard romance with a miscommunication trope. It is truly just two people constantly misunderstanding each other, making assumptions, and being so concerned with how other people see them. And I'm at a point in my life where I'm kind of like, if you like what I'm doing, you like what I'm doing. If you don't, you don't. I'm just no longer at a place where I am so deeply invested in what other people think about me. And the characters in this book definitely care so much about what other people think about them. And it definitely got to a point where it was pretty annoying. But at the same time, I felt like it was very realistic in terms of how people tend to interact. One thing that I thought was interesting was that with our two main characters, we have Connell and Marianne. And Marianne, I'm my understanding from the book is that she is pretty well to do. She comes from a very rich family, and Connell's mother was like the housekeeper for her family. That's how they originally met, but they both go to school together. But I found it really interesting that even though she has kind of this more privileged lifestyle, she's not someone who is kind of respected or revered at school. She's actually the one out of the two of them that's treated really poorly at school and that people really don't like. And I didn't necessarily feel like that correlated with experiences that I've had. I feel like typically the people who are the haves versus the have nots are the people who are more popular and tend to have an easier time, especially in school. But I don't know. I just thought that was kind of interesting about this book that the character that came from a higher privilege background was the one who really struggled with that and felt like they weren't necessarily a normal person. But yeah, overall, I mean, I felt like this was a pretty dissatisfying book, but I think it was meant to be a dissatisfying book. So I did end up rating this 4 stars overall, and I do think that's because I was comparing it to Intermezzo a lot. But I would say it is a good read, and if you're wanting to try Sally Rooney, I don't think it would be bad to start here to find out if you like her writing and then try some of her longer books. And then up next, and the last audiobook that I finished while we were on the trip was Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I just absolutely loved this book so much. Emily Wilde is 100% a STEM girly, and she totally surprised me. So I really thought that this book was going to be your run of the mill cozy fantasy. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I was going to like it because I had that misconception. I really thought it was just going to be cozy fantasy without a lot of substance. But the fact that Emily Wilde is a researcher and she is like this STEM girl who's like kind of awkward, she is pretty introverted, she doesn't do well with social interaction, she definitely misses social cues, which I feel like is a big part of this book. The fact that we have her as our main character and we're seeing everything from her perspective and also from the perspective of someone trying to write some research papers or academic works. I really personally enjoyed that. I think that that really elevated this story for me above what I had originally expected it to be. And I really enjoyed all of the detail that this book gives with regard to the fairies that she's studying, as well as just the different area that she travels to and the people that live there. Because I think that's really interesting to see her learn not only the customs of the fairies, which she's trying to include in her research, but also to understand people from a different background and start to understand how she can find her place in that group of people. But overall, I just really love this. I love Emily Wilde, and I also love Wendell and all of the other characters in the book. And so I did rate this 5 stars. And as soon as I finished this, the second book was available as a skip the line copy. So I kind of did something bad, and I'm currently reading the second book in this series, which was not on my 25 for 2025, but I am going to finish that before I start the audiobook for The Great Alone. So when I come back to you, I will give you my updates on the Bone season. I'm about halfway through right now, and it definitely has picked up a lot. I'm definitely a lot more invested, so I am definitely going to be reading that a lot faster moving forward now that we're home. And then hopefully, I should finish the second Emily Wilde book today or tomorrow, and I will start Normal People. And by that, I meant The Great Alone. And I should be able to have that done by New Year's Eve. So I will give you my updates on both of those when I come back to you. And as promised, I am back with a final update. So I have finished The Great Alone and The Bone Season. So let's talk about The Great Alone first. So I did listen to the audiobook for The Great Alone, and I actually was able to start this on Spotify, but I ran out of time. But I was enjoying the audiobook enough that I just went ahead and I purchased this through the Libro app because I did have one credit on my account that I hadn't used. So I just went ahead and picked it up. And this is probably one that I would re listen to. So I do try to reserve my credits for books that I actually want to own as opposed to things that I just want to give one listen to. So I try to use Libby or Spotify for books that I don't want to permanently have copies of, but I did go ahead and pick this up on Libro because I did have that credit. And exactly as expected, this was absolutely heartbreaking. I really loved our main character, Lenny, and her experiences and her story. I just feel like she was such a picture of resilience. And I really think that Kristen Hanna excels at showing strong women through her books. And unfortunately, Lenny should never have had to be resilient. But I think one thing that's really cool about this book, because it does contain a lot of really dark topics, there's a lot about domestic violence, and there's some physical trauma that happens because an accident occurs, things like that. So there are some really dark and scary things that happen in this book. But one thing that I think is really cool is that, from the synopsis, it says right here on the back of the book that our family that we're following, the Albrights, which are Lenny and her two parents, Ernst and Cora, they are going to relocate to Alaska because Ernst kind of gets a bug pretty occasionally and moves his family around to chase the next big thing. And that's kind of been how he's been since he came back from fighting in the Vietnam War. And I think from the back of the book, you might assume that the difficult thing that Lenny is going to face is the fact that she's going to be living in Alaska and it's going to be pretty remote and they're basically homesteading and it's a very small town and people with very strong opinions about how things should be done. And you might think that it would be the nature that breaks Lenny, but I think throughout all the struggles that she faces in this book, it's really her experiences in Alaska, not just due to her family and her father, but her experiences growing up in Alaska and the things that she learns are really the things that end up making her. And I think it's just so true by the end of the book that she really belonged there. So it was an unfortunate circumstance that took her there, and a lot of the things that happened as a result of that were negative, but there were also some really amazing, beautiful, positive things that came out of that really, really dark experience. And that's not to say that if someone was going through something like Lenny goes through in this book, that they should go through it because something positive will come out of it. Absolutely not. No one should ever have to deal with the things that are covered in this book. Like I said, it is pretty dark, but I just thought the positive things that did come out of Lenny's experiences were really beautiful, and I really appreciated how the story ended. And again, this book is just another testament to how Kristen Hanna showcases and writes great, strong women and shows that it's also okay to not always be strong or not always know what to do and to lean on others when you need to. So, this was a 5-star read for me, as I assumed that it was going to be, and I definitely enjoyed it and would recommend it. And I probably will at some point reread this. I think I want to do a rereading Kristen Hanna vlog at some point, not anytime soon because I need a little break, but in the future. And there are definitely still other Kristen Hanna books that I haven't read yet that I really want to read. So I'm sure you're going to be seeing a lot more of her on my TBR in 2026. And in other news, I did finish The Bone Season, but I have a small confession. I did not finish The Bone Season until January 3rd. So it is now after the new year, and I wasn't able to completely finish this by New Year's Day. And you know what? That's okay. Really, the reason that I wasn't able to finish it by the end of the year was because of all the traveling we were doing and all the plans that we had. And I wouldn't trade those things for finishing a book on time. So It is totally okay, and I'm glad that I didn't rush this reading experience because I love Samantha Shannon and her writing, and I ended up loving this book as well. I really, really, really enjoyed the character Paige Mahoney and the things that she ended up experiencing and how she found herself and found her strength throughout the book. And at the end of the book, there's a lot that happens, and I really felt so empowered watching her stand up to people. And so I don't want to spoil anything, but this book had some very heartbreaking moments. It had some really empowering moments. It had some very touching, intimate moments. And I just thought overall that it was a really amazing read. I did take a look at some of the other ratings for this book on Goodreads, and unfortunately, the version before Samantha recently revised it and the current version cannot be separated on Goodreads. So this book has a much lower rating because of the negative reviews that the first iteration of this book had. And I believe that she wrote that when she was like 18. So it's definitely understandable that it wasn't up to par with some of her other work. And I can definitely understand based on some of the changes that I believe she implemented, especially in the plot and the way that the characters act from the first book to now the revised version of the first book. I can definitely understand why it had some lower ratings, but I really hope that that doesn't deter people from getting into this series because I absolutely enjoyed it. And I did give this a 5 star. And not only did I give this a 5 star, but I also mentioned that I do have the entire series. I have them all as ebooks, and I have the previous versions as physical copies. As soon as I finished this, I downloaded and started the second book. So I do think I'm going to be binging this entire series. So if that tells you anything about this book, I'll let that speak for itself. I loved it. I really thought the characters were so cool. I thought the magic systems in the book were so cool. And I'm really excited to see where the story goes because I think Paige is only going to go up from here and continue to discover more things about herself. And I can't wait to see how that unfolds and how that affects the world around her. There is still a threat that remains after the end of the first book. So I'm really excited to continue to follow along and see how she tries to overcome that. But if you like fantasy, if you're okay with a fantasy that's more modern, so there's technology involved, think kind of like Crescent City if you've read those books, but not necessarily as much smut. Definitely nowhere near as much smut. There's definitely some romance, but I don't think there was anything intimate that was explicit at all, which I personally prefer because sometimes when there's tons of sex scenes in books, I just kind of roll my eyes and start to get annoyed with it, especially if it's detracting from the plot. So if you're okay with Crescent City and the way that there's magic, but it's set kind of in a modern day city, so there's a lot of technology, it's a little bit more sci fi, then you would probably really enjoy the Bone season. And I would also say if you are someone who enjoyed books like Six of Crows, that duology, then you would probably really enjoy this because Paige does come from the Syndicate, which is the crime gang in London. And so you do have a lot of that aspect that's part of the book. And I have already started the second one, so I can say that becomes an even bigger part of the second book as you continue to read. So I would definitely recommend these. I hope this series starts to get more attention. I definitely think it deserves it. And I definitely think the revisions were a good decision that have impacted the book for the better. So I did end up rating this 5 stars and I would recommend it overall. Now, obviously, the Bone season was the last book that I finished for my 25 for 2025 vlog. So that does mean that I didn't completely finish all 25 of my books. So let me tell you the ones that are still remaining. So the books that I did not get to that were on my list were Rogue Protocol, which is, I think, the third book in the All Systems Red Murderbot series, Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I did not finish A Song of Ice and Fire, which I am a little over 400 pages into. I don't recall if I gave you kind of the backstory with that one at the beginning of the video, but I used to just pick it up in between reading other books and read like 50 pages here and there because I'm already familiar with the story. So I'm definitely still going to finish that one, but I did not finish it. The House in the Cerulean Sea and Babel were the last five books on my 25 for 2025 that I did not get to. Now, I am disappointed that I didn't read these this year because I really wanted to read them, and I definitely would say that they are still high on my list of priorities for 2026. I definitely want to read Babel because it's a goal of mine to read that before I read Catabasis, so I'm definitely going to be doing that soon. And I would say The House on the Cerulean Sea is still pretty high up on my priority list at the moment as well. So, going into the next year, I have selected 26 books that I want to read in 2026. That video is up on my channel if you want to go watch it. But I am going to be a lot more intentional about making sure that I'm actually getting to those books and putting them on my TBR cart so that I can pick them for my monthly TBRs next year. But I think getting to 20 out of these 25 books was still a huge win. And honestly, look at how many five-star books I ended up having in this video alone. So I definitely still think these were all great reads, and I'm so happy that I got to them. It's a bummer that I didn't get to the last five, but because these were so good, I'm definitely still motivated to pick those up soon because I think I did a pretty okay job with picking my 25 books for 2025. So I'll put a little graphic on screen so that you can have an overview of the 20 books that I did get to and see a quick review of what I rated them. And with that, we can go ahead and close out this vlog and 2025. So, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you. And if you've read any of the 20 books that I got to off of my list, I would love to hear down in the comments what you thought about them and if any of these were five-star reads for you as well, or if you had a completely opposite opinion from me and did not enjoy any of these books, please let me know because I'd love to talk with you about it. As always, thank you for being here. I hope you have an amazing day and an amazing start to your 2026. Bye.